Welcome to the first ever, I guess, not just the first Underwater Homeowners Association meeting, but a second first, the first virtual Underwater Homeowners Association meeting. And I asked our chair to work with us in leading a conversation about how it is that the vulnerabilities that we have seen with exposed, right, with this pandemic, how not just the climate crisis that all of us as individuals interested in climate change, the climate crisis, the climate emergency we're living in it and because itself, in fact, in many ways, in every way, that is more destructive and more of a threat to us humans, to our society, to our world of life than this pandemic is. But even this pandemic is exacerbated by the threats to our climate. And I just thought it'd be prudent in speaking, with Adam and speaking with Brian to organize this month's meeting as a meeting where we actually explore, as an Underwater Homeowners Association, how we have all been impacted by the pandemic, and to see if there's some connections between what we literally are enduring now, the vulnerability we're feeling now, and if there's a way of learning some lessons from that as we look at the vulnerabilities that the climate crisis that brought us together as an Underwater HOA is. And as I'm seeing here, there's lots of faces that are also new. I mean, there's people like Holly and Brian and Victor who've been here since day one and have been at all of our meetings, but there's some new faces. So I want to ask Adam, who's the director of Cortada Projects, before we let Brian lead us in this discussion, just to put what the Underwater HOA is in context and explain the Underwater HOA. Adam, could you lead us through that real quick? Well, not real quick. Take a few minutes to do that.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna just take a few minutes real quickly because I want to try to wrap this up by 8 o'clock. So for those of you who do not know too much about the Underwater HOA, I'm going to share my screen and just go through our website really quickly. Let me do this. Let me know. Let me get like a nod from you guys if you can see what I see.
Yep, we got you.
Okay. So right now I'm on the Underwater HOA website, and what this is a participatory art project that combats sea level rise through community-oriented action. But more specifically, this is a socially engaged project that uses these yard signs and community meetings to do a number of things, but really to raise awareness and advocate for action on climate change in a way that is kind of unprecedented, because as some of you know, I got my master's studying climate communication, and it's a hard thing to communicate to a lot of people because there are so many issues going on. There's there's a lot of priorities, and environmental issues don't necessarily always take the top mantle. So when you can't communicate so easily with people, what do you do? And what Xavier created back in 2018 is this Underwater HOA project, where you take a yard sign that literally has the elevation of your property on it. And that's what these are right here. If you are sitting at 2 feet above sea level and you find that out via an app that we use, you would take it, put it on this sign. And actually, these that Xavier created were created with Antarctic ice painting backgrounds. So when he went to Antarctica back in 2006, he created these ice paintings using the sea ice and sediment, and that became the backdrop for these elevation yard signs. So now when this is sitting in your front yard, and it could be one of these, or it can be one that you make yourself. So like you see on this one, you can literally just take a political yard sign or a for sale sign, paint it over white, and then put your particular elevation. And this is something that is going to catalyze conversation, because people are going to see it and ask, what does that number mean? What is this all about? And now you can begin engaging them regardless of where they lie on the political spectrum. If this is your neighbor, for example, they literally lie at the same elevation as you. And this and sea level rise is something that they cannot afford to ignore. And that's where this project really hits you where your wallet is, because if you care about the value of your house, you're going to care about sea level rise if you're living in South Florida. So Xavier partnered with a bunch of schools and the students there, and actually had entire intersections painted with the elevation of that intersection. So you can imagine driving by, and you can't miss it, right? It's huge. So in addition to the yard signs, in addition to these intersections, we've been having meetings every single month, and obviously we're now transitioned to a virtual platform because of coronavirus. But if you were on our website, for example, you can go through and see all of the different speakers who we've had over in 2019. And we used to be here in Books and Books in Pinecrest, and then moved back to Pinecrest Gardens, where Cortada Projects is located. So I think that's really the brief that I want to give here. So I'm going to come back and stop sharing. And I'm back now, right?
Yes. Yes. Great. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Adam. And Adam is managing the chat room. So Brian is about to come into the conversation and talk about this idea of drawing the connection between the vulnerability that we're experiencing now and what lessons learned today and lessons we can apply in the future. But while that's happening, if you have any questions, again, everyone stay muted, please. If you have any questions on the chat room, just ask them. And what Adam is going to try to do is, at the end when Brian is done talking, we'll figure out how we moderate the Q&A in a way that everyone gets to have their question asked. So Brian, if we could just have a conversation with you just really quickly. And again, we talked about this a few days ago. I also see several of our other colleagues here from U of M who have had this conversation with. I see Jessica from our law school, Professor Ali, and Professor Mock from Rasmus, who literally had one of these similar conversations with me. So after you're done, I may ask them to also just opine if they feel like doing so. But Brian, if you would please, as chair of the other Underwater HOA, you've led the group through all these meetings and all these exercises where we try to visualize the future, where we try to understand how the actions that we take or fail to take today literally have an impact, not just in that house you're sitting in, the house that your kids are going to inherit, but just basically on overall society. And it's been hard to show the future to people because it's too far away and they don't imagine it's something that's impacted them here and now and today. So I just wanted you, I know you're going to make a presentation for us, but just if you could, as a point of departure, as someone who studies, I mean, I think actually not everyone here knows that you are the professor at Rasmus, that you literally run the SUSTAIN lab that tests structures at the force of hurricanes by having a hurricane in a box, if you will. I mean, you can obviously introduce yourself, and I'm sure you're going to explain that as you do, but you're an expert who tries to help bring science to help us understand how to adapt and how to deal with storm surges and the impact of hurricanes, and how hurricanes and what happens as water heats and evaporation happens, how hurricanes get stronger. So clearly you're someone who's trying to convey to our society how this climate crisis really impacts us with Category 5 hurricanes by warming our oceans, and what kind of structures we can build to adapt to protect ourselves from that. So as someone who has that kind of expertise, who understands our vulnerability, because you literally study that and run a lab around that, what lessons have you seen from the way our government at the highest level, our society here locally, individuals, what lessons can we look at modeling and science and human behavior as we go through this pandemic?
Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm Brian House, as was introduced, and we'll see if I can touch on some of those. There's a pretty full plate that Xavier laid out there, but I mean, one thing is we're all watching at home and living through this period. I think it certainly has brought a bunch of issues to mind and has shown some things about our society and science and how we relate to that. And I think one of the, and you mentioned my work in hurricanes, which is really where my expertise lies, not so much in some of this stuff, certainly not in pandemics, and not
sure, of course,
not in necessarily in some aspects of sea level rise, but then the hurricanes, storm surge. But we all are familiar with the uncertainty inherent in hurricanes, and in watching the forecast and understanding the need to prepare for them immediately in South Florida in order that we can be protected. And however, we don't have any any ability to actually impact the future of that hurricane, right? We're not at a point where we can take some action that will reduce the threat. And however, both in pandemics and climate change, it's not just a question of preparing for an uncertain future. It's the fact that what we do now can impact that future in very substantial ways. So I'm going to share my screen here and do just some slides, just kind of use as a jumping off point. It's not going to be a super long deal, but here. So it is, that's what can we learn about climate change and resilience from this COVID-19 pandemic. One thing I obviously didn't learn is how to spell Pinecrest, but I apologize for that. So the the time scales here. So basically, we have let's just say from the beginning of this thing about 3 months ago, let's say 100-day time scale that we've been living through in terms of when we first started to hear about this happening. And of course, in climate change, when we're really going to have severe impacts, I mean, you can question whether or not this is a 50-year time scale that we have here in South Florida, or a 30-year time scale, 100-year, 200 years, but certainly a couple orders of magnitude longer in terms of time scale. And so I think that this to me, as I've been sitting and following and participating, living through this, it's been the scale of this. A lot of the same issues come out as in climate change and getting action taken, but on a much.
Brian, the slides seem to be cut on the ends. I don't know if you can see that on your screen. I don't.
Okay, let me just change the way I'll change the way I'm sharing.
No, yeah. If what you were doing there would work for a second. I mean, we see your PowerPoint, but at least we can see the slide.
I think I'll do this here.
Okay.
And then I'll go to my.
Yeah, like we see your whole slide there. Just so you know. There we go. Thanks so much.
Okay, so that should be good. So,
thanks.
This compressed time scale of, where early in February first started hearing about it, or December, January going back. I mean, there was word coming in around, but it still wasn't touching our lives directly. But we've heard that on basically the same day, U.S. and South Korea both got their first cases. Now, these two graphs, of course, don't look very much different in the initial phase, or don't look dramatically different early on, except for the fact of the scale in the U.S. graph, which is in tens of thousands. But I know it just shows, okay, so there was this initial thing. And I remember not that long ago when people saying, well, how can it be if we only got one case now that we can grow like rapidly enough to cause the kind of problems that the scientists are saying, the medical people are saying, that this could be, hundreds of thousands of deaths if we don't do anything, et cetera. It just was almost inconceivable to us, right, as lay people, to think that this could grow so fast. And yet that's what the scientific consensus was telling us. And unfortunately, as a country, we didn't react anywhere in time to arrest this at the levels that South Korea did. And I'm not going to try to go into details of why that is or anything, but just from an big overview, they were able to manage this by responding really quickly, and, as they say, flattening the curve and reducing the new cases. And of course, as we know, this is the daily deaths on the left of the US, and the daily deaths up through yesterday, and the daily deaths in South Korea. And it had a incredibly substantive effect on people's lives by acting early, right? So this to me is a dramatic case where listening to the best scientific advice. Now, we don't always, as a scientist, I know we don't always get everything right, exactly. But there's things that have been seen that you have more confidence in than other things. And when predictions are made that have a high degree of confidence that this is something that needs to be acted on immediately, then we need to learn as a society how to respond to these things in a timely fashion because, and I think this just clearly shows that. And oops, I'll get back to this here. Let me go. I wanted to show, so, okay, no, I'll just go. So sorry. So the climate comparison, right? So going back, I mean, we know going back, of course, that CO2 has been rising in the atmosphere since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution and is now at levels higher than have been seen in hundreds of thousands of years. And I mean, there's no question about that scientifically, and it's easy to extend this curve in particular to understand where it can go without action, right? So that's what the science has been saying is, we're putting all this CO2 in the atmosphere and it's causing global temperature rise and a significant year by year increase in our sea level that we can argue about whether it's accelerating or not. But I think the key thing that I want to talk about here is that the best available science, running the best available models that scientists have a pretty high degree of confidence in, show that this rate of rise is going to increase, much like the rate of infection, the rate of pandemic deaths, increased dramatically from what you would get by just drawing a simple line through the number of cases early on and the number of deaths. Our science, our models, don't always get it perfect, and they can always be improved, but they're getting better and better. And as in the case of hurricanes, where we now know that within about 50 miles where a storm is going to hit a few days out, which is factor of 3 better than we did 20 years ago. We have a lot of confidence that this trend is not only going to continue, but it's going to increase. And we have to think about planning accordingly. If we don't, and we have to take action. The second part of this is, of course, this flattening the curve. And I think now that everybody's got the flatten the curve message, or at least most people understand what that's all about. I mean, there's a very similar curve that we have a longer time scale to deal with, but we also need to think very seriously, very quickly, I mean, as soon as possible, about how we can flatten that curve. These are different scenarios for what happens to the atmospheric CO2 under basically a variety of scenarios which involve more and more aggressive mitigation measures to reduce CO2 emissions. And Catherine is much more versed in these different things than I am. Catherine Mock is on this Zoom, so I won't go into any more detail, let her address that. But basically, as you see here, the sooner we can act and hold this down, we can get CO2 levels that don't increase too much over where they're at today, all the way up to, which is would require pretty severe immediate action. I mean, not as severe as the total shutdown of our society that we're experiencing now, but certainly something that would require major shifts in our economic behavior and industrial behavior. But you can see that there's very different scenarios long term in terms of where we get of atmospheric CO2 concentration. And those different scenarios have these different effects in terms of the increase in temperature that we'd see out by 2100. And if I go back, the sooner, the later you act, let's say we acted in 20 years, we've already bought in, much higher levels of CO2. If we don't act, the sooner we act, we should have, if we'd act, every year we wait, we buy in more and more CO2 change, which we cannot change because it's in there for hundreds of years, 100 years or so for CO2 and way longer for others. So there's no way we can change these things if we don't act sooner. And I think that's the thing that has been the corollary to this accelerated timescale of the pandemic just really strikes me in that regard. And again, we see that these different scenarios have very real differences in temperature, which would correspond to very, not only sea level rise, but devastating changes in the biology and who knows, direct links perhaps to expansion of tropical diseases and things that we could be more and more exposed to because of this. So the jury's out on what exactly these different things would be if you went into these nightmare scenarios where we do nothing and 80 years from now, we have a climate change that's, climate that's on average 4 degrees C warmer. But anyway, these long-term things, we have to act now, and we need to flatten that curve immediately. And I'm saying we, and I'm just throwing out this one thing. Most of you probably know this. Right now, right now, the United States is not the biggest emitter of carbon dioxide, right? And that's one thing that people will say, well, it's not us anymore. It's China, it's India, it's the rest, other people that are out contributing more than we are. And that's true currently. But I think that as Americans, I'd like to think that we're still capable of addressing big challenges. And we can at least, accept the fact that this is the cumulative CO2 emissions since the start of the 1751. So the U.S. has contributed the largest share over any other section of the world. EU is the whole yellow curve here. Than anybody else. So we own a lot of this problem, and we need to be able to, and we have a responsibility in my mind to contribute significantly to that. And so the other part, and I'm just kind of, I said, going quickly here, and hopefully we'll have some discussion about this. The other thing that has been striking to me is that, well, I'll go back one slide here. As the richest country in the world, all this CO2 emissions came with a benefit to our wealth, of course. And the biggest, the most richest and most powerful country on the world, how lacking in resilience we really were. And, many societies with much less resources than ours have proven to be far more resilient than we have been in this crisis. And this is something that I think is shocking in a way. I mean, I never conceived that we'd be taking these dramatic actions. I mean, you don't, obviously it was in the playbook of a lot of these pandemic response people, but it wasn't necessarily something that I was particularly aware of. But for the richest country on earth to not be able to go 2 months without being able to feed its people in a reasonable way and support its people so that they don't have to go back to work, so that they don't feel compelled to expose themselves to any risks, is frightening, is really quite disturbing. It doesn't and bodes and suggests that we need to seriously think about how, as a society, we can enhance our resilience to climate change, because clearly we are demonstrating in this crisis that we have not built a society that is structured to be resilient to serious threats. So those are my thoughts, my links to the pandemic, and I'd be interested in, if there's questions or discussion, I will stop sharing now. And
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. Let me see if either Catherine or Jessica have something to add to the conversation before we open it up to the questions, just in case you had any ideas or comments. I'm maybe putting you on the spot, but do either of you want to say something about it? Okay, Catherine, I see Jessica, but I don't see Catherine on my slide. But if there isn't,
I think I am now unmuted. So I've got video and phone on separate. So sorry that that's a little bit awkward.
okay.
I would just highlight a few things. Thank you, Xavier, Adam, and Brian for those really nice opening thoughts. So pandemic, climate change, what are the interconnections? 4 things I've been thinking about. Number 1, climate change is a globally synchronous crisis, right? Everyone in the world is experiencing it at the same time, yet we don't really feel it. I think for the pandemic, we really have felt it. It also is globally synchronous, everyone at the same time. And I think just comparing and contrasting our experiences across the pandemic and climate change, super, super important. Number 2, as Brian emphasized, when we put heat trapping gases into the atmosphere, especially CO2, for human purposes, the effects are permanent. The warming is permanent. And that means that stabilized climate, we've got to drop our emissions to 0. My classic thinking on this is, well, the only way to drop emissions to 0 tomorrow would be to crash the global economy. We can get there based on policies that exist now, but it requires dedicated political will. But I think also the current crisis is a real reminder of the degree to which so much of our climate challenge is just a technology challenge about choices and technology we have available today, as we have seen emissions plummet over the last few weeks. Number 3, as emissions have plummeted over the last few weeks, I really think we have an opportunity to think about what it means for human priorities to work together as compared to at odds. When this pandemic starts to resolve over the next months and maybe years, it may be the case that our emissions bump right back up to where they were, where basically we're kind of trading off public health for economic and the emission consequences of that. Or we could be in a world where our public health priorities, our economic well-being, and our climate change impacts work together, and we come out of this pandemic tapping the strengths of having reduced our emissions. So I think that's just a phenomenal opportunity at present. And the last point I will highlight, I think a lot about the way that we can inform decisions and choices on the climate issue. The pandemic is a low probability event with really high consequences. There are many surprises in store from climate change that are also low probability, very high consequence. What does that mean? You can't guess exactly when they will happen, what they will look like, but you can do a whole lot of pressure testing, scenario planning. Where will the cracks be revealed? And that is something about what capabilities we have to respond no matter what, how flexible, how nimble can we be. I think Brian highlighted really, really nicely the degree to which the US, among global players, has not tapped that during the pandemic, and we're not tapping it on the climate issue as well. And this connection between the local and Pinecrest and the global and the climate challenge of the pandemic, I think, is a really powerful opportunity at present.
Hi, hey guys, I don't know if I can interject here, but I did have a couple questions. I wasn't sure if I could ask right now, but I.
Yes, so what we're doing is we're getting on the chat room, Adam's taking the questions there, and then I'm going to ask him to ask Adam, so what's the first question that we have on the chat? And then just, if you don't mind, just put your question on the chat. So
yeah, no, Brittany put her question there, so I'll get to you in a second. I know so thank you, Brittany. The first question actually came from Victor. Victor, I don't know if you'd like to pose your question, or I can read it for you.
Go ahead and put Victor on. Victor is one of our executive committee members in the HOA and has been with us since the onset. So Victor, if you could just ask a question.
I will. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Go ahead.
So really what I was thinking about as you were beginning your opening comments was that we've heard during the COVID crisis that a number of positive environmental changes, and that was just being referred to a minute ago. Since we've cut down on emissions, we've had cleaner air, cleaner water, and we've seen changes in very, very short periods of time. Whether those are anecdotal or really documented changes is one of the things that we never really know when we're watching things in the news. Are there examples of those changes that would reinforce what we talk about in our organization on the effects of environmental change on individual homeowners, individual properties? You know, we tend to talk about the negative sides. Are there positive feedbacks that come out of this crisis that would be helpful to us in terms of getting our message across?
By crisis, you mean the pandemic, right?
Correct. The exact COVID crisis, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if Brian or um,
Well,
Catherine have opinion. Yeah,
since
Brian.
Victor, since you addressed the question to me, I guess I think to me the main thing that we can point to is like there's changes in air quality in particular regions. I mean, we don't have enough data to say globally yet, but certainly the satellite data has shown significant changes in the air quality over, India and China in particular, and other places. And I think that strikes, the atmosphere is such a thin layer wrapped around our planet with we can really impact that. We've shown that with ozone and other things that humans can have a dramatic impact on the atmosphere in relatively quick timescales. And I think that this is something that we need, can build on to show that, hey, you change these emissions over, you can definitely, because that's one of the, that's one of the new deniers talking points, right? Well, after saying, well, climate change isn't real, well, it's not man-induced, well, it may be man-induced, but there's nothing we can do about it. And to some extent that's true, because you can't get the CO2 out very quickly. But at the same time, it also shows how sensitive the atmosphere is. And I think that's pretty, I think that's a message that we can build on. And then locally in these places that have taken new initiatives, then I think that they can build on that. I fear that public transit in the US is going to be hammered by this. And I don't know when, I'm a daily Metro Rail rider, or was before I'm staying at home. I don't know when I'm going to get back on the train. So there's some positives and negatives, I'd say, for sure.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask Jessica to share some thoughts for this. But as I'm looking at this pandemic, and I think I'd like to let you guys know that I'm part of a very small initiative that the university is doing on trying to capture the voices in real time on how this pandemic is impacting us in society. It's a COVID-19 rapid response research grant that I'm involved with. And that's why this conversation is going to go on part of that platform. But I think one thing that we've seen is when there's a crisis and it's imminent, Victor, you see that, and people feel that it affects them personally and individually. You're talking about you as a homeowner, or something that affects your home because of this. You see people respond. You see government come up with $2 trillion. You see mayors and officials react, some irresponsibly, others more responsibly, but overall, you see a response. Climate change will impact us in more adverse ways. Maybe you don't feel the threat imminently, but it is here. And what you can see is if there's enough understanding of how some invisible virus of 27,000 kilobytes can literally kill you, then you are going to respond. Just like when we had a couple of cases of Zika in this community, you saw the county do everything. Why? Because tourism collapsed and people feared that they were going to be impacted. So I do think that this has shown us that we do have the capacity to respond. And I also think at another level, it also has shown, I want to be positive, it has shown the amount of compassion and generosity that people have, because some I think that's been demonstrated. I don't know, Jessica, if you wanted to add some of this, we asked Catherine, but if you had any comments on this.
My speaker is working. I thought I didn't set it up right. I don't know, not much. The only thing I would maybe add is from a legal standpoint is a real conundrum we're seeing with kind of the, on the other side of this, while we're seeing these environmental successes, a response to the environment, we're also seeing the crisis being used as an excuse or justification for a lack of enforcement of environmental laws and a pushback on some of the environmental laws, both in the idea like that they're too hard for us to comply with all the things we're supposed to be doing, and that perhaps we don't have our priorities in the right place, that we should be instead prioritizing how to get the economy back moving. So I think we have a real tricky but important role to play here in thinking about how do we go forward with some of our laws and policies as well, once some of these threats abate, perhaps.
Thanks. And for those of you who don't know, Jessica Alley's a professor at the law school and focusing on environmental and property law. Adam, is there another question out there?
Yep. So the next one is actually from Christina, and I'll let Christina ask it if she wants to. Otherwise, I'm happy to read it. She's muted at the moment.
Go ahead, Adam.
All right. Yeah. So I'll read it for. So the question is this: a number of cities around the world, such as Milano, Brussels, Paris, and New York, have decided to use the COVID-19 crisis to reduce traffic in their cities by encouraging spaces, streets, roads, plazas, etc., to these activities. It's about social distancing, but also reducing the use of cars, a big contributor to global warming. Are you aware of any local plans to do this? And if not, would you support such initiatives? I mean, I know that from me, I don't know of any local plans. I'm sure we all would be in support of, moving to mass transit and moving away from cars. I guess anybody who's more connected with government would know if there's any plans for that at the moment.
Holly, you don't have any insight on that, do you? You're muted, just so you know. Holly, if you're speaking, you're muted. No, you don't? Okay, I can't hear you, but I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say that,
it's not as, sorry. So this is the first time I've done this one, and so it's not as easy as just going to as Zoom is at this point for me. So, am I actually still in the meeting?
Yeah, we're here. We're hearing you.
I'm just looking at myself.
Yeah. Yeah. We see you and we hear you.
Okay. So, okay. So your question was, and which it wasn't. I actually was.
Yeah. It was really about the car. In response to
I'm talking to myself. That's all I'm saying right now. Okay. So what was your question?
No, I know that as one of our members that's been working a lot on this, you're looking at sort of solutions, things that people can do and act on. And you and Adam, I know, have been talking a little bit since our last couple of homeowner association meetings on things that can actually be done. And in this case, someone posed the idea of some European cities in response to the pandemic are looking at what happens with transport, what happens with trying to create mass transport, again, a way of mitigating. And I know you're really involved in a lot of civic issues. I'm just wondering if you've heard of any consequences. Obviously, Brian is saying the opposite. He can't get on his metro rail. I'm just wondering if you've heard of anything like that.
Look, right now, I think I am part of the brigade that's trying to educate our new mayor.
Okay.
So because she's starting from scratch. So I actually don't have a lot to add on that.
Brian.
Yeah, I don't have too much either, but I was going to say that the one thing was that right before the pandemic, I know that Miami-Dade County was about to unveil a new bus transit plan, like the first. They're really pushing, re-envisioning the bus routing and all that. And so they're with the goal of providing better, more rapid service to key transit routes and things like that. But obviously that may need to be reevaluated in the context. The whole idea was to get more buses quicker and get people moving faster along key routes. But I mean, if you got to reconsider how many people you have on a bus and things like that, then I don't see that plan going forward right now. But I haven't heard of anything else other than the fact with all the people out walking and biking around, maybe more people will see that it's a beautiful place to do that and try to go to all.
Adam, is there another question?
Yep. So I'm going to let Brittany introduce herself and ask her question. I think she's
Thanks
ready.
so much, Brittany.
Hey guys. So I don't know if you can hear me or see me.
Yep, you're good.
I work for State Representative Michael Gottlieb. We represent Plantation, Sunrise, and Davie, and we are trying to feed. So I'm kind of trying to oversee this portion of our district right now. We're trying to feed so many constituents that are so hungry, that have not received unemployment. They've not, and I know that you guys are not overseeing any of this, but they haven't received unemployment, and they continuously go to these food distributions and they run out of food. And I have been hearing a lot of information about farmers who have all of this food and these crops that they are disposing of, that they just they don't have anywhere to deliver it to. And so I'm basically kind of concerned about that, like what's going on with that. But I guess more so I know relating to the environmental side of things, I've been on countless White House calls every Wednesday. So I've done about 6 or 7 White House calls, and they'll give us information at the federal level as to the funding that they're providing for each agency. And they don't ever state that they're providing assistance to Department of Environmental Protection or anything relating to environmental issues. They don't ever address those issues because that's not their, I guess that's not the president's priority, which we all know. But moving on, I will say that the agriculture portion of it is the agriculture portion of collecting food and having a food pantry and providing assistance to states and to allow the states to distribute that money to counties. We're having a really hard time feeding these people in our district, and we're having a really hard time getting them access to food. And I don't know if you can provide any information as to the agricultural portion of how food's collected or distributed, but I know that that's something that we're dealing with, and I'm answering countless emails a day about how to get people food assistance. I don't know if you might be able to provide any information on that. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Yeah, you're clearly referencing what Brian had mentioned about this country that is so rich and can't deal with this. Victor, I know that you also are, familiar with parts of Redland. I don't know if you have anything to contribute. If you do, chime in. And I'll let whoever speak if someone has an answer to the food scarcity. I know that part of the issue at hand is just how do we create a more sustainable way of being, whether it's slow food, those kind of things. But just to answer, and Brittany, clearly there's a correlation between the climate crisis and this pandemic. It is exacerbated by those pollutants and the particulates that Brian was just talking about in that chart. Clearly, it's a disease that affects breathing. The more pollution in the air, the weaker your lungs are. For every, basically, the more pollution in the air, the more likely it is you're going to die from COVID-19. And the more deforestation you engage in, the less ability for photosynthesis to happen and recapture that carbon. But as importantly, it's more ability for human contact, as those animals are fleeing habitats that have now been deforested and are coming into contact with humans that they would have not before, and creating that. So clearly it's all interconnected, and you're right. This administration has done nothing but destroy decades worth of clean air, clean water, environment, endangered species regulations. Absolutely. That's a crisis that we're facing. And what we're trying to do through this meeting is try to find a connection so we can have an understanding. Everyone's on board. Everyone's got face masks. Everyone's staying at home. They understand how this impacts their lives. I'm not so sure that they're drawing the dots connecting to the kind of stuff that you're bringing here and the kind of food scarcity and insecurity that you and your representative are enduring. I mean, are seeing your constituents endure. Brian, I don't know if you wanted to add to this or if anyone else wants to add to that. If not, I can have Adam ask for the next question. Okay, Adam.
Yep. So I'm going to hand it over to Luis. He had a comment on the chat. And so, Luis, if you want to unmute yourself, you have the floor. We don't hear you. No, I see. It looks like your mouth is moving, but.
Luke?
Mm.
Okay, here we go.
There we
Can
go.
you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, hello, Xavier. So, by the way, thank you guys for putting this together. Good to see you guys again and healthy. So it's all good. Well, basically, what I was my comment in here, Xavier, and everyone else, is the following. I feel that I'm very concerned, or somewhat fearful of what is going to happen, globally, locally, on statewide, countrywide, once we start getting back, to work and so on. And my whole fear in terms of the large corporations, they're gonna try to catch up, and there's already I've read articles about how people are pushing plastics and pushing a lot of different strategies to try to catch up, to make up for the time lost, for the funds lost. So I feel that we have a really good opportunity at this time to bring, at least locally, to bring your community together, talk to local elected officials, county, municipal level, even the state level, and begin to attempt to have a comprehensive discussion of a post-COVID strategy, to potentially reduce, let's say, an expected, environmental impact by potential actions by these large corporations. So this is what has been in my mind, and I thought about, I've been thinking about this. I'm glad I had opportunity to share this with you. My intention was to begin this discussion with Jim Early on the county level, and maybe bringing together a variety of different nonprofit organizations and elected officials to begin discussing what are the things that we can do, that we can implement, and so we don't lose what we have gained up until now. You know what I mean? So that is my thought. So I like to hear you guys' feedback, so suggestions and thoughts on that, and if there's an interest, should we move forward? Should we give some steps? Again, I was planning on sending a message to Jim Early tomorrow to start discussing this. So what are your thoughts?
In many ways, I want to echo what Jessica said a while ago about the crisis and the economic disruption and the reprioritization of what matters, because now it's all COVID, when this is a critical issue. And I'm not suggesting the county is doing this, but I can see when so much of our economy has collapsed, just like Brian was talking about, the sense that we're now going to invest more in bus fleets, or maybe the idea of living vertically, which is essential, I think, for reducing a carbon footprint, as opposed to the urban sprawl that has made this county go and eat up the Everglades at lower elevations. That there might be a movement backwards, just like the rollback of the regulations at the federal level. There might be this knee-jerk response, and you're right. I think the environmental community, the environmental leaders, have to advance that. I just don't know if anyone here has some comments on where we think we are. Luis has been an important environmental leader in Miami-Dade County for decades. In fact, when I started the reclamation project in 2006 in Miami Beach, he was the president of ECOM, which was a really wonderful environmental group in Miami Beach. So yeah, I think your voice will get through. I just wanted to see if someone else in the panel and someone else in the group wants to answer that question for you.
I think for me, a lot of sorry, this is my first meeting. I think a lot of where these companies are coming from is very money driven. So I think where changes need to happen are basically where their money comes from. So companies are willing to make changes if they feel like consumers will buy their products based off of that, where I know there's different markets for different types of consumers, but it's all owned by the same couple of companies. So you have companies that will market towards, I guess, more liberal people, and then towards more conservative people that are basically the same company under different names. I think driving your average everyday person to all agree that, like, you know, environmentalism is a big part of people purchasing products will make a difference. But there's also, I think, a lot of policies that are already in place that are intentionally blocking the ability for more communal spaces where, like, for instance, people's front lawns look the way that they do because of it's a status symbol. But it's better for our environment to have local plants growing and, like, even food to, like, garden and share. But your house then loses value when you do that. And so it's like this sort of, there needs to be like a nationwide shift in, like, where and what we want things to, you know what I mean? Where it's like we all have to be on the same page and agreeing that these things are necessary, because your house won't lose value if everyone agrees that having a garden and growing native plants is important. And so I think it's all connected to, it is connected to money, and where like a lot of the decisions are in place because of that.
I have a question. Can I make a comment on that? I mean, in general. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I
wrapping
guess,
it up in a minute, but go ahead.
Okay, I guess, and exactly because of what you just brought up, is that we're talking amongst ourselves in here. It's like I think that we are going to need some type of local mini summits, or to bring all of these ideas together, because we can talk about it, we can discuss it, we can make some suggestions. But if we don't get these ideas out there, if we don't get involved our political leaders, our decision makers, then we may lose opportunity. So I feel that we don't have much time to waste right now. That I think we should bring this idea together right now and start creating something new to move forward, to prepare ourselves for the next step post COVID.
Yeah, that's a very good segue for what we're trying to do here. So Brian, I'm going to let Adam speak for a second, but I'd like to end and I know we're trying to end by 8, but I'd like to end the meeting with you and I just having a brief discussion, as we had, about the next steps for this Underwater HOA, looking straight in the eye of having us not be able to meet at Pinecrest Gardens for months, right? Until we feel that it's acceptable to do that. We're going to keep it on this platform, and what we're going to do as an Underwater HOA, and kind of what Luis is saying is, how do we not rebrand but pivot and use this pandemic as a way of raising the conversation in a new Miami-Dade County so impacted economically by this pandemic. So let's just have that little quick chat and see what our next steps are. But Adam, did you have a question or some closing comments before Brian and I do that?
Yeah, there was actually one last question that I wanted to pose to our faculty members. If you would, I just kind of wanted to hear your thoughts. And this is just the relationship between the coronavirus and climate change. We can tell is very political. And when you're looking at the polls, the conservatives want to reopen the economy and get things going, and liberals want to, remain closed down. And then when you look at climate, of course, it's very partisan. You have the majority of liberals who want to take big climate action, and you have conservatives who tend to not want to do that. In my experience, the scientists have gotten a bad rep on the right, and I'm just kind of curious how you would handle talking about this with someone who, and assuming that they're on that side of the political spectrum, and they don't necessarily respect the science or respect the scientists too much, or maybe they think that the scientists have their own agenda. How would you go about approaching that conversation? Because I found that that's something that's kind of it's difficult to have, and it just shows now with coronavirus that the scientists are still not being taken as seriously as they need to be. So I'm just kind of curious in your thoughts on that.
I guess my quick insight would be that there are value-based choices no matter which way you look at this. You can take a strict public health viewpoint, you can take an economic vantage point. But I think the thing that the pandemic has revealed is the degree to which these are interconnected. And I think Brian's time trends of the public health domain, we're not going to know the full economic picture until way down the line. But ideally, our diverse priorities can operate in tandem as compared to in odds.
Thank you. Does any, so he was gauging to our faculty. I don't know if Professor Ali or House want to have a comment on that?
I mean, I guess I think that clearly there's obviously divide politically. I don't think that that's the most of the issue shouldn't, I mean, obviously it's a strange bastardization of our politics that has led us to this, in the sense of that basically trying to make an informed decision about where we go as a country to respond to obvious threats that are identified. I don't think that inherently has a liberal or conservative bias to it, but it's about how you act. But unfortunately I don't know how we get beyond this distortion and basically financing of how we get beyond to where we make decisions, whether or not they're I mean, conservative solutions or liberal solutions. At least we acknowledge that there's a problem, move forward. That is going to require some major changes in our country to get to that point. And I'm hopeful that we can get there. I'm hopeful going out of this that people are going to see, hey, now I'm 55 or 6, and when I was in college, it was the Reagan era, and Starve the Beast was what they started then. And I think we've come to what I think is the nadir, hopefully, of what we have seen, that what a starved beast can do for its people. And I think we're going to need a major overhaul to be able to address, and there's going to be a lot of challenges, because obviously, as Luis said, pandemic and response to that is going to be first and foremost in everybody's minds, but there's all kinds of challenges. It's going to require a fundamental reevaluation of our approach. I don't know how I personally have obviously a pretty liberal approach to how that should be done. But I think we got to get beyond this idea that we can't recognize the basic facts, and I don't know how we do that.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
If I can just add to Brian's comment just now. I will say, on behalf of the Florida Democratic Party, we have all submitted letters to the Secretary of State requesting a special session to address the issues that have arisen from COVID-19. We are awaiting a poll that is being gathered right now. All of that information is being gathered right now at the state level from the Secretary of State's office to determine whether or not we're going to hold that special session. And I really hope we do, because I hope it will address a lot of these issues that have arisen from COVID. So that's all I'm going to say. But the Democratic Party has taken action, and my representative has submitted his request for special session, as well as a lot of other Democrats. It is a political thing, and it is something that the Republican Party does not see as necessary. I'm certain that the Speaker of the House is not interested in hosting a special session to discuss issues that have arisen from COVID-19. He's made a lot of public comments about that, and that's really unfortunate, because he is from Miami-Dade, and he knows that there's a lot of people that are being detrimentally affected by this crisis. So I just think it's really important that you all, if you are interested in making a difference at the state level, if you contact your local representative and request a special session by tomorrow, 5 p.m., those polls are being recorded, and we are taking those polls and sending them to the Secretary of State.
Brittany, thank you. And while we wrap this up, if you could drop a link in the chat, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
You want me to
Professor
drop a
Ali,
link with my email, or do you want me to because basically it would basically depend on where you lived and which
I would drop your emails, and then people can reach out to you if they would.
Perfect. Because then if you want to reach out to me and then just leave your email, if you leave your address, I can find your representative, and then I can give you the information for you to contact your representative.
Thank you, Brittany.
All right,
Absolutely.
Professor Ali, did you want to respond to that question at all about the partisan divide? Or I mean, I'm also going to be making a quick comment about it. I don't see you, so I can't see.
Jessica, I saw her leave.
Okay, so Brian, I think I want to just because we're running a few minutes late off this meeting. Adam, to answer your question, clearly the whole premise behind the Underwater HOA was to go beyond this partisan divide, right? The idea is that you had a political sign in front of your house, in front of my house, asking for a Democrat, and my neighbor across the street may have had a Republican, and I just wanted to paint those signs in white because Antarctica doesn't care what party you are. The same way that the virus doesn't care what party you are. So part of what we're trying to do is find a common ground. Part of what I'm trying to do through my art is reframe the conversation so that we can see the mutual benefit in us working together. And like Brian, I can't understand this bastardization where science now belongs to one party and the suspect in the other. One thing I see out of this pandemic is that I think Americans across the board have embraced science, have absolutely understood that there needs. I mean, the government may have not at some levels, but clearly our citizens are listening to scientists and therapies and vaccinations and advice from science and understanding how this is literally an issue that science needs to respond to. And I hope that these trends and these understandings across society do apply. For you, Brian, who is a scientist, chair of our group, and really honored to have that. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you see the Underwater HOA that you are going to be running? We have with us, of course, Adam, who's the director of Cortada Projects based at Pinecrest Gardens. With us, I want to give a shout out to Jamal Wilson, who's a master's student at our university. Jamal, say hello, so at least you come up. You said hello earlier at the beginning, but Jamal is a master's student who is interning with us for 20 hours a week to take the Underwater HOA to another level. He is helping create a resource page within the Underwater HOA website that is more active than just some links, that actually gives us some day-to-day innovation. And I've linked him with a group I serve on a national board for the Climate Migration Network to have him take that information and bring it to us. And Jamal, thank you. You're also helping me create a toolkit so that other groups across Miami and elsewhere can create their own underwater HOAs. So Jamal, thanks a lot for your leadership here. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a great opportunity.
Yeah. So Brian, what as the chair of the actual Pinecrest group, and I know that Holly and Victor stand with you as members of the exec committee. What ideas, we talked a little bit about it, but what ideas do you see as us moving forward as an organization?
Well, I think that we're going to, as you stated earlier, we're going to have to figure out how to work together in this remote platform for the foreseeable future, and we hope to build on where we've been together for over a year now. We've had a lot of time or we've had a number of monthly meetings, and we've learned to have speakers. We'd like to continue that educational kind of and talking to each other aspect of it to some extent, but we'd like to also kind of develop more focus groups that can follow up on certain aspects of problems and really, like subgroups of the Underwater HOA that can address particular issues. And one of those, for instance, could be how do we get on, maintain environmental issues on the agenda for Miami-Dade County and the state of Florida going forward, for instance, in the light of this, undoubtedly what's going to be a focus on COVID type, the pandemic. But obviously we think there's a lot of links that can be made and a lot of reasons to stay on that focus. That could be one group. Another group, for instance, could be one of the things that Xavier's project with the mangroves, for instance, there's Plantee, which we saw on the homepage, related to planting mangroves in people's yards, looking forward to the future. And I think that that's really inspired because we need to start thinking long-term. We're trying to get our planning to have a longer horizon such that we can say, okay, we know this is going to happen over decadal time scales. And we need to plan for them now. And I think that trying to just figure out how we can change the mindset of planning in South Florida to go on longer time scales. So a couple of ideas I have, but I think the key thing is we're going to be having more smaller group discussions, maybe use breakout rooms and things after we have some initial group together in this remote platform. And it was great to see so many people on, and great to see new people and people with great ideas. So it's really exciting. Sort of a kickstarting at the online Underwater HOA. So we'll hopefully we can keep some energy up and really, I mean, it's such an important time, I think, to how we respond coming out of this. Do we retrench? Do we allow all these environmental rules to go by the wayside, or do we say, okay, this is a lesson for the future? That's where I hope we can.
Thanks, Brian. I know in the chat room, Victor had talked a little bit about, and what now with hurricanes? We're all sort of prepared, and a lot of us have solar panels and generators, but now do we need to have our own garden? So I do think, Adam, why don't you, of course, convene a meeting? It'll have to be online with Holly, Brian, Victor, and of course, Jamal, yourself, and me, just to sketch out the agenda for the next meeting. I know that Brian is looking at putting together a panel of speakers, mostly, from our university to come and help, do something that Victor wanted, which is he likes the idea of having the meetings have a speaker with some heft talk about something. I also want to take Holly's pragmatic action that there's something that we need to do as an organization. I think Brian just gave us, two directions. One, kind of what, Luis had been talking about. How do we, in light of this change, make sure that we still continue advocating so that the environment doesn't lose presently, but also planting mangroves so that we understand that there's a bigger threat in the years to come if we don't act today. So that's the essence of what we're going to be doing as an Underwater HOA. Adam and Jamal, I leave it to you two to figure out how we can work with the technology so that we can be in breakout rooms, or how we organize this, how we curate it, how we put it on the website so people can see it, how it gets condensed into a smaller summary so that this is useful for individuals. But and I especially want to thank you, Adam, for all the hard work you did. I know that you did a lot of work. I'm so impressed with your leadership, not just in running Cortada projects, but in bringing all the people together for this meeting. So thank you so much.
For sure.
You're really inspiring. And then Brian, let's go ahead and convene another meeting to make this work. For all of you, it's my honor to convene you first at my studio and now on this website and platform. Look, there have been, hold on, because I keep a little diary of how many people have died in Miami-Dade County. So as of yesterday, we had 407 individuals died. I haven't seen the numbers that were released at 6:30 today. 407 of our neighbors have died, and those are the ones that we know that have been tested as having died. 29 people, 29 Miami-Dade County neighbors died yesterday. And although those numbers are absolutely outstanding, astonishing, the truth is that I personally expected these numbers to be not 407 over the course of this, and that number is higher. Because there's some people who died of strokes or this is a novel virus. We don't know people who had died, whether or not it was because of the virus. And there's other issues with nursing homes and people who haven't really been accounted for as deaths due to the virus. But let's just call it 407. That number is there because our superintendent closed the schools down on March 13th. He announced it. By that Monday, it was closed. And then the universities followed and businesses followed, and we all practice social distancing. That's why that number is not 407 a day, but 407 in totality. My fear is as we relax these numbers, as we relax and we think we have the sense that, it wasn't such a big deal. The reason it wasn't as hard, and it's horrible, right, is because we social distance. We took this seriously. And I just want each of you to please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, take care of yourselves, be vigilant, be compassionate, reach out to people who you may not have heard from in a while, and just connect with them as good homeowners and neighbors do. But also understand that we are nowhere out of this crisis. And for the group, the team that has been organizing this for a while, the future is here. That's why you and I and you have been working so passionately for so long, because this idea of food scarcity, of people suffering, of the inequities in society being exacerbated when a pandemic hits, when those who don't have the ability to do Instacart or get in their own cars, right? There is a real disparity and a real vulnerability that has been exposed by this pandemic.
Yeah.
So I, through my art, try to show that. I try to tell you guys, your houses will drown. Bad things are going to happen unless we act today. Well, this pandemic has shown us how horrible these things are. So please, I know that these are very, taxing processes to try to create a movement and get people motivated. It's such a piecemeal way. I understand how hard democracy is and how hard it is to organize a group like ours. But the stakes honestly couldn't be higher. They really, really couldn't be higher. And we just need to continue working to try to effectuate change, to make a difference for us today, but for our progeny, for our society as a whole. So stay safe, stay healthy, and please stay involved. Stay connected. I know that Brian, Holly, and Victor are going to lead the homeowners group to do that, and Jamal and Adam are going to try to scale that up so that others can see what we do and model what we do. All right. So again, thank you so much, Brian. Thank you for taking your time to put that presentation together, and thanks for all the participants who were here with us today.
And I'll just give you a big thank you. I guess Brian did the same. So Xavier, thank you for leading us, and of course, thanks everybody for coming. Everybody who is here, you will be getting an email for our next meeting, and just so everyone is aware, it's the first Wednesday of every month that we do meet. And again, it would be at Pinecrest Gardens, but it's going to be on an online platform moving forward. Hopefully, you found this to be productive and enjoyable, and you feel like you learned something and could take something from this. Ideally, this is a platform that we want to use to engage people, to grow, and to communicate and to educate. So again, thank you for being here. We really appreciate your time, and go enjoy some dinner.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Right.